Is the Celtics' obsession with depth a problem? The Boston Celtics have one of the deepest rosters in the NBA, and this is often highlighted as a major advantage. But could this constant pursuit of depth actually become a problem? After all, there comes a point where too many options become more of an obstacle than a solution. Let's break it down. The Celtics' rotation is already well-defined. Jayson, Tatum, and Jaylen Brown are the stars. Jrue Holiday and Derrick White provide stability. On defense and playmaking, Kristaps, Porziņģis, and Horford rotate in protecting the paint. On the bench, players like Payton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, and Luke Kornet are fulfilling their roles effectively. So, does it make sense to keep adding more pieces to this puzzle? The main issue with an excessively deep roster is managing minutes and egos. Head coach Joe Mazzulla already faces the challenge of balancing his stars' court time while keeping everyone engaged. If a veteran is brought in, who gets pushed out of the rotation? And more importantly, how would this affect the locker room? A clear example is Payton Pritchard. After years of waiting for more playing time, he's finally earned a meaningful role. But if the Celtics bring in another experienced guard, like a Goran Dragic, or even a former Celtic like Marcus Smart in the future, what would that mean for him? It would not only set back his development, but also hit the morale of a player who has been important to the team this season. Another critical point is team chemistry. Overcrowded rosters often breed frustration among players. Limited minutes can throw off an athlete's rhythm, and internal dissatisfaction can erode the group's cohesion. We've seen this happen with other teams that tried to stockpile talent without a clear structure to utilize them. Then there's the financial factor. The Celtics are already operating at the salary cap limit, and any new acquisition could compromise their flexibility for future moves. Is it worth spending more to bring in a player who might not even have a significant impact in the playoffs? The truth is, sometimes less is more. Having a balanced and well-structured roster can be much more advantageous than randomly adding pieces. The Celtics need to focus on maintaining team chemistry and identity rather than stacking up talent without a clear plan. After all, a championship team is not just built on depth, but on a cohesive and well-defined group. Is Josh Richardson a waste of time for the Celtics? The idea of bringing Josh Richardson back to the Boston Celtics raises an important question. Is it really worth investing time and minutes in a player who has barely played this season? Richardson has undeniable qualities. He is a solid defender, a good three-point shooter when he's in rhythm, and has plenty of experience, having played for several NBA teams, including the Celtics. On paper, he seems like a decent fit to bolster the bench and bring more versatility to the roster. But does this move make sense within the team's current context? Let's look at the facts. Richardson has played only a small fraction of the season so far, dealing with physical issues that raise doubts about his ability to make an immediate impact. If a player isn't in peak condition, not only does he struggle to contribute, but he could also disrupt the team's dynamic by trying to catch up with the competitive rhythm. Boston is fighting for the top spot in the Eastern Conference and can't afford to gamble on a veteran who may never regain his best form. Additionally, his previous stint with the Celtics wasn't exactly memorable. When he wore the green and white in 2021-22, Richardson had some solid moments, but nothing that justified keeping him long-term. He was traded without much fuss because his presence wasn't essential to the rotation. Now, in 2025, the question remains the same. What can he really add that the team doesn't already have? Another point to consider is the impact on the development of younger players. Giving minutes to Richardson means taking opportunities away from someone like Payton Pritchard or Sam Hauser, two players who have already shown they can contribute when given consistent chances. It would be wiser to let these athletes grow and take on more responsibility on the court, rather than bringing in a veteran who may not even be 100% physically, and at best, will be just a rotational player with little impact. And there's more. The depth of the roster is already a concern for the Celtics. As we discussed before, stacking up too many players can be a problem, especially when talking about athletes who aren't in peak form. The team already has Derrick White and Jrue Holiday dominating perimeter defense, Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum covering multiple positions, and bench options who are well-versed in the system. Adding Richardson to the mix may just be a waste of time and resources. If the Celtics truly want to add another piece to the roster, it might make more sense to look for someone who is in top shape and can contribute immediately. Otherwise, investing in internal development might be the smartest decision. Richardson may have a respectable name in the league, but at this moment, he brings more questions than answers. Is the buyout policy unfair to the league? The buyout market is one of those topics that everyone knows favors the stronger teams, yet the NBA has yet to find a solution to balance this scale. The Boston Celtics, for example, don't desperately need reinforcements, but they can still sign a useful veteran for a practically symbolic amount. This raises an uncomfortable question. To what extent does this policy harm the competitiveness of the league? Looking at recent history, a clear pattern emerges. Year after year, experienced players who no longer have a role on weaker teams are waived, and elite teams pick up these players on minimum contracts. This allows contenders to strengthen their rosters for free, while franchises not fighting for the title lose talent without receiving anything in return. The result? The gap between the top teams and those at the bottom of the standings just keeps growing. The big issue is that teams in rebuilding phases aren't doing anything illegal by waiving these players. For them, it makes sense to open up cap space and give more minutes to promising young players. But this logic only works for teams willing to lose in the short term to try to win in the future. For the rest of the league, it creates a vicious cycle. Weaker franchises tank their seasons, while the stronger ones accumulate even more talent without giving anything up. A clear example of this was Andre Drummond. In 2021, the Cleveland Cavaliers decided it no longer made sense to keep him, so they waived him. Soon after, he signed with the Los Angeles Lakers on a minimum contract. The same happened with Blake Griffin, who ended up with the Brooklyn Nets. Players who still had value simply fell into the laps of teams already in the championship hunt. And here comes the more thorny issue. Should the NBA change this rule? One alternative would be to create a more competitive waiver system, where teams could make offers to waived players, preventing them from simply choosing a contender. Another possibility would be to require teams to negotiate buyout contracts, ensuring that the teams losing players receive some form of compensation. The fact is, as it stands, the buyout market favors wealthy and well-structured franchises, while smaller teams are getting further and further from the title race. The NBA has made efforts to increase parity among teams, but as long as this rule remains, contenders will continue to strengthen without any risk or sacrifice. Is the league willing to tackle this issue? Should Derrick White feel threatened? Derrick White has been one of the most important players for the Celtics. Since his arrival, he has become a crucial piece on both ends of the floor, taking on an even bigger role this season. But the potential addition of Josh Richardson raises an uncomfortable question. Do the Celtics still see White as a long-term pillar of the team? There's no denying that White has established himself as one of the most reliable players on the roster. His perimeter defense is elite. His ability to space the floor has improved significantly, and he fits seamlessly alongside Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. However, when a team starts looking for reinforcements at the same position, it could indicate some level of dissatisfaction, or at the very least, a desire to explore new options. If Boston were 100% satisfied with its backcourt, would it make sense to consider adding Richardson? Of course, there's always room for more depth, but the psychological impact of such a move also needs to be considered. White might start questioning whether the team sees him as an indispensable piece or just another system player, replaceable depending on the market opportunities. Another factor to consider is White's contract. He is still on a relatively affordable deal, but with the salary cap rising and luxury tax rules becoming stricter, are the Celtics already planning ahead for the future? Richardson may not be a direct replacement for White, but his arrival could signal that the front office still sees room for adjustments in the backcourt. At the end of the day, White remains one of the most valuable players on the roster, and his importance shouldn't be underestimated. But as the NBA has shown time and time again, no one is completely safe. If the Celtics continue exploring reinforcements at his position, White may once again have to prove that he deserves a leading role on this team. Should the Celtics have done more at the trade deadline? The Boston Celtics are undeniably one of the most dominant teams this season, with a roster full of talent, a well-defined tactical system, and the experience of a group that already knows what it takes to be a champion. The team has all the pieces to compete for the title once again. However, when the trade deadline came and went without any major moves, a lingering question emerged. Should Brad Stevens have been more aggressive? Many expected the Celtics to make at least a minor adjustment, particularly to bolster the front court. While the center rotation has been effective, it still has some vulnerabilities. Kristaps Porziņģis is an incredible player, but his injury history always raises concerns. Al Horford, despite his intelligence and experience, cannot be relied upon for heavy minutes, especially given his age. And Luke Kornet, while useful, isn't exactly the most reliable option when facing dominant big men on opposing teams. So why didn't the Celtics pursue a more solid backup center? Players like Andre Drummond or Daniel Gafford were available and could have been acquired at a reasonable price. Even someone like Kelly Olynyk, who already knows the franchise and has a skill set that would fit well, could have been a valuable addition. But Stevens chose to keep the roster intact, trusting in what he already has. This decision can be viewed in two ways. On one hand, it's a vote of confidence in the team's depth and chemistry. Tweaking a rotation that is already performing well can be risky. On the other hand, playoff basketball demands adjustments, and ignoring an obvious weakness could prove costly when the games become more physical and strategic. And it's not just the front court where Boston could have made a move. The backup wing position is another area that could have been reinforced. Sam Hauser has been solid, but is he enough to cover all the team's needs in a tough playoff series against teams like the Milwaukee Bucks or Denver Nuggets? A versatile wing who could defend multiple positions and space the floor would have been a valuable addition. Players like Royce O'Neal or Dorian Finney-Smith were available and could have provided exactly that type of impact. Another factor to consider is the risk of relying solely on the buyout market. Instead of securing a known upgrade through a trade, the Celtics are now at the mercy of whichever players get waived. And that raises the question, will anyone truly impactful even become available? History shows that buyout players often don't make as big of a difference in the playoffs as many expect. The big question now is, could this passivity backfire? If Boston reaches the finals and falls short because they lacked a reliable backup center or a wing capable of handling a tough matchup, the decision to stand pat at the deadline will be seen as a major mistake. But if the team wins the championship, with this roster, Stevens will be praised for his patience and strategic vision. Time will tell whether the Celtics made the right call by not making any moves. But in an NBA where every detail can decide a championship, wouldn't it have been worth taking a bolder approach